Sometimes a single sentence passes through the day like an unexpected breeze. Don't push. It doesn't require it. Don't argue. She just touches it, and yet something inside shifts. Have you ever felt this? As if behavior reorganized itself without conscious effort, without promises, without rigid goals. As if a silent part of you recognizes something old, almost forgotten, and decided to act differently without asking the mind for permission. Imagine walking along a trail covered in damp leaves. After rain, the ground cannot resist your steps. He gives in gently, and precisely because of this the path becomes safer. There is an invisible wisdom that acts like this. She doesn't correct it by force, does not point out errors. Don't raise your voice. She just falls in line. At the heart of this wisdom is a short phrase, almost too simple to seem powerful. A sentence that does not command, does not prohibit, does not threaten. Still, when she is welcomed, behaviors begin to transform like water that finds a new course around a rock. It's not about motivation. It's not discipline, much less control. It's something closer to remembering who you are when you're not fighting the flow of life. In the silent tradition that comes from nature, we learn that the invisible always arrives before visible. First, the spirit adjusts. Then, the actions follow. Just like the mist dissipates when the sun appears, not because it was pushed away, but because it no longer needs to be there. Maybe you're tired of trying to change. Perhaps you have already forced habits, words, reactions. And maybe, deep down, you know that too much effort usually just creates more tension. What if instead, all you had to do was listen? What if one sentence, just one, could act like a calm mirror, reflecting what do you need to harmonize, without judgment? In this video, we're not going to talk about rules. Let's walk together through a space of listening, a space where behavior changes because the interior calms down. If you feel like there's something invisible guiding your days even when you can't explain, stay here. Maybe this phrase is closer than you think. In a world where we are constantly encouraged to act more, control more, do more, a paradox arises. Sometimes the secret to what we seek is in doing less, no less in quality, but in effort. In Taoist philosophy, there is a powerful concept called Wu Wei, which can be translated as non-action or effortless action. This does not mean inactivity or laziness. On the contrary, it means an action that flows naturally, that arises without resistance. It's like a current that goes around the rocks, like the wind that passes through a tree without forcing her to move. True strength lies in gentleness and adaptation. If we observe nature, we will see that nothing forces its way. The river does not try to reach the ocean. It simply runs its course, and its persistence it's not about the effort, but about your ability to adapt to the obstacles you encounter. When there is a rock in the way, the river does not fight against it. It flows around, smoothly. Over time, water wears down the rock, transforming it, not by brute force, but for his patience and fluidity. This is what the wisdom of Wu Wei teaches us. When we try to force results, we waste unnecessary energy, and many. Sometimes we get the opposite of what we want. But when we allow ourselves to act lightly, with more presence and less control, the results begin to manifest almost by themselves, not because we are doing more, but because we are letting things happen naturally, instead of pulling the line with all his might. Like an impatient fisherman, perhaps the better to let the line drop and wait for the bite. There is a magic in not forcing. It's like a dance where both partners know what to do, but without rushing, without pressures. Movement flows, and changes happen without the need for resistance. This non-resistance does not mean passivity. It means acting with intention but without the rigidity of controlling everything all the time. It is a way of being present in what is, without the anxiety of having to shape it every time. Second, the secret is in accepting the natural flow of life. Not fight it, but find it a way to go along. The punchline we explore here does not come with a direct command or an action formula. It simply reminds us of our ability to let go, to trust the present moment and allow solutions to emerge in an almost invisible. Think about it. When you think about something you couldn't achieve, in some area of your life where frustration has accumulated, ask yourself, where am I resisting? Where am I trying to control something I can't control? Control? Maybe the answer is no longer an effort. Maybe it's learning to let the flow happen. This is not an invitation to total inaction. It is an invitation to realize that the power of what does not force is, in fact, the power of adaptation, acceptance, harmony. And so, silently but profoundly, things begin to move. There is a profound difference between a sentence that orders and a sentence that reveals. The first attempts to direct behavior by force. The second just shows, and by showing, transforms. The Shinto catchphrase does not come as advice nor as a moral rule. It doesn't tell you what you should do. She doesn't point the way with her finger. It sits there, silent, like the calm surface of a lake, waiting for you to come. Get closer. When someone looks at this lake, they don't see instructions, see reflections. This is how this phrase acts. Like an invisible mirror. It does not alter the external world directly. It reorganizes the interior. And behavior, naturally, follows this new arrangement. In everyday life, we are used to reacting. React to tone of voice. React in a hurry. Reacting to the fear of losing. The fear of not being enough. These reactions are repeated so much that they seem part of our identity. But they are not. They are just accumulated habits, like dust on an old surface. The sentence does not remove this dust with a rough cloth. It just invites silence to settle in. And in the silence, the dust begins to fall by itself. Maybe that's why she's so disconcerting. Because it doesn't promise immediate results. It offers no guarantees. She just says something simple. And that simplicity cuts through the defenses that words more elaborate ones cannot overcome. When this phrase is listened to carefully, something curious happens. The mind tries to analyze it but doesn't find much to grasp. There is no argument to win. There is no logic to disassemble. Then the mind, little by little, retreats. And when the mind retreats, the body listens. Breathing slows down. Gestures become less rigid. The words come out with less harshness. Not because someone told me to, but because there is no longer so much tension sustaining the old behavior. In the spiritual tradition that observes life as a continuous flow, it is believed that being human does not need to be fixed. It needs to be remembered, reminded of your natural ability to live in harmony with what is. The phrase works as this reminder. It doesn't add anything new. It removes the excess. And when the excess falls, space appears. Space to choose a different answer. Space not to react immediately. Space to act more smoothly, without it seeming like an effort. It is at this point that behavior begins to change, not for discipline but for clarity. Not out of fear of consequences but out of internal alignment. Like a bell that, when touched, continues to vibrate even after the hand moves away. This phrase remains echoing silently throughout the day. And every time a difficult situation arises, the echo reappears, not as an order, but like an invitation to act from the center, an invitation not to harden, an invitation to allow the invisible to lead the visible, without rushing, without fighting, without unnecessary effort. In the next step of this journey, we will look at why the modern world is so resistant to this kind of silent transformation, and what happens when this resistance finally begins to dissolve. Modern human beings have learned to live in an almost permanent state of tension. Even when everything seems in order, there is an invisible tightness deep in your chest. Constant vigilance. A silent preparation for the next problem, the next charge, the next threat imagined. From an early age, we are taught that changing requires effort, that improving hurts, that growing up is synonymous with gritting your teeth and moving forward against the resistance of the world. And little by little, this logic infiltrates everything, in relationships, at work, in the way we talk to ourselves. The result is hardened behavior, automatic responses, defenses raised even before any real attack. When someone points something out, we react. When something gets out of control, we contract. When life slows down, we feel guilt. This is resistance, not just to the world, but to the natural flow of existence itself. That's why a sentence that doesn't force causes so much strangeness. It does not fit into the logic of continuous effort. It does not offer a plan of action. It doesn't promise performance. And precisely because of this, it encounters resistance. The modern mind distrusts what does not require a fight. She asks, How can something so simple work? And in this question there is already a conditioned reflex, the belief that value is always in the wait, in the difficulty, in the sacrifice. But watch carefully. How many times have you tried to change a behavior by force and failed? Strict promises broken, abandoned habits, attempts that begin with enthusiasm and end in exhaustion, not because of a lack of will, but because of excess pressure. The phrase acts on another layer. She does not confront resistance directly. She doesn't try to bring her down. She waits. Like the sun that doesn't argue with the fog, it just rises. At first, the old behavior is still there. The reactions are urgent. Patterns repeat. But something changes in the way this is seen. A small gap appears between the stimulus and the response. An almost imperceptible gap. And in that interval, the phrase returns. Not as a loud voice, but as a memory smooth. At this point, resistance is not combated. She is observed. And what is observed without? Judgment begins to lose strength. This is how the behavior starts to loosen up. Not because he was pushed out, but because he no longer finds as much tension to sustain. If this idea resonates with you, it is a sign that something inside has already awakened. Not a ready answer, but an opening. A silent willingness to live with less friction. The world will continue to be demanding. The pressures will not disappear. But the way you position yourself in front of them can change. And it changes. First because of inside. When the resistance drops even a little, something rare appears. Lightness. And lightness is not born from escape, but from alignment. In the next step, we will enter this space where behavior is purified naturally. Not as a moral effort, but as a direct consequence of an inner who finally found calm. There is a moment when the water stops being cloudy. Not because someone filtered it in a hurry, not because it was forced to change, but because it was left at rest. When the water calms down, what doesn't belong there slowly sinks to the bottom. Human behavior follows the same logic. For a long time, we believed that changing is adding something. More control, more rules, more surveillance over ourselves. But true purification happens when the excess dissolves. In the spiritual tradition linked to the cycles of nature, purifying is not punishing. It's not correcting. It's removing what impedes the flow. Anxious behavior, for example, does not come out of nowhere. It appears when the interior is constantly agitated. Thoughts run over each other. Fears repeat themselves. Expectations accumulate like dry leaves on the surface of the water. The phrase works exactly there. She doesn't try to tear off these leaves one by one. It just invites stillness. And when the interior slows down, something changes almost imperceptibly. The impulsive reaction takes a little longer to emerge. The harsh word encounters a small obstacle before leaving the mouth. The automatic gesture loses part of its strength. It's not rigid self-control. It's clarity, like a fog that dissipates when the sun touches the valley. Behavior begins to change. Purify because there is no longer so much confusion supporting it. This purification does not happen all at once. It happens in layers. First you notice, then you pause, and only then, without conscious effort, do you respond differently. Not because you decided to be someone better, but because at that moment, acting in the old way no longer makes sense. It's like trying to scream in a silent temple. The atmosphere itself invites caution. The phrase creates this internal space. It acts like a clean stream running through old land. Wherever he goes, he takes away waste that had been there for years, not with violence but with constancy. Many are surprised to notice that behaviors that seemed difficult to change, they simply lose importance. Certain discussions are no longer worth it. Some reactions no longer find justification. Old impulses arise but do not dominate. This is not repression, it is purification. When the inside aligns, the behavior reorganizes itself, like branches that they find a new position when the wind changes direction. It is at this point that life begins to take on a different rhythm. Less friction, less wear, more presence. Water remains water. The wind keeps blowing, but everything finds a new balance. In the next step, we will observe how this silent transformation begins to unfold, manifest in everyday life, when the phrase no longer needs to be consciously remembered because it has become part of the very way of being in the world. There comes a time when the phrase stops being remembered, not because it was forgotten, but because it has already fulfilled its most profound function. It has become part of the natural movement of life. When this happens, something subtle reveals itself. Decisions become simpler, less tense gestures. The body responds before the mind begins to argue. Living aligned with the invisible does not mean living without challenges. It means going through them without hardening. There is a quiet intelligence that operates when we are not too busy trying to control everything. She doesn't announce herself, does not ask for recognition, but guides small movements throughout the day. You realize this when you choose silence over excessive explanation, when you take a step back without feeling like you're losing, when you accept a slower pace without guilt. None of this seems extraordinary, and that is precisely where the transformation lies. Before, every situation required effort. Now, many simply resolve themselves, not because the world has changed, but because the fulcrum has changed. He left the anxiety and settled into listening. In the tradition that observes the sacred as something spread throughout all things, it is believed that the invisible manifests itself when there is space. Just as the wind can only be felt when we are not too closed in, the sentence creates this space, and over time space expands. You start to notice subtle signs, an unexpected break, a meeting that was not forced, a solution that emerges without planning. None of this is magic in the ordinary sense. It's natural. When the inside is aligned, the outside life encounters less resistance. Choices become more coherent. The limits appear clearly, without the need for confrontation. It's like walking through familiar terrain at night, guided not by bright light but by path memory. Each step is firm, even without seeing everything. This alignment also changes the relationship with the error. When something doesn't go as expected, there is no internal collapse. There is adjustment, like a boat that slightly corrects its course when it feels the current change. The phrase is still there, but now as a silent background. It does not need to be repeated. It manifests itself in posture, tone of voice, the way you enter and exit situations. Living like this doesn't attract attention, it's not impressive, but it holds. And this support brings something rare: continuity. There are no peaks followed by sudden drops. There is constancy. Little by little, you realize that the effort has decreased, but the presence has increased. That there is more space between you and the noise of the world. That the invisible, previously ignored, was always there, just waiting for you to stop, to push life, to start walking with it. At the end of this journey, we will bring all of this together in one last movement. A closing that doesn't explain too much but invites. Because what really transforms does not need to be understood completely, just lived. In the end, it's almost never about changing who we are. It's about removing what took us away from our natural rhythm. The Shinto punchline does not transform because it is intelligent, profound, or well formulated. It transforms because it doesn't compete with the noise. She does not try to win the mind in the argument. She hopes the silence will do the work. And when silence arrives, something essential reveals itself. You realize that many behaviors were not conscious choices. They were automatic responses to a fast-paced world. Defenses learned. Repeated hardening. When this becomes visible, discreet relief appears. How to realize that you don't need to carry so much at the same time. The real change happens there. The moment you stop fighting yourself. Life continues to bring challenges. People continue to test limits. Situations continue to spiral out of control. But now something is different. There is an internal axis, a silent center that does not move easily. And when the world pulls you one way, you don't get swept away immediately. The phrase remains there like a constant whisper, not telling you what to do, but remembering how to be whole, be present, being in harmony with what happens, without losing your own form. Just as a tree does not argue with the wind, but neither does it break every time. Gust. This is effortless change, not because there is no movement, but because the movement is no longer against it. If something inside you recognizes yourself in those words, don't ignore it. This recognition does not come from the rational mind, it comes from an older, deeper place. Sign up and continue walking with us along the path of the soul. Here, each reflection is an invitation to live with more lightness, presence, and connection with the invisible that sustains everything that breathes. You may notice small changes over the next few days, a reaction that doesn't happen, a calmer response, a chosen silence. Don't force it. Watch. Because when something changes effortlessly, it is a sign that it was not imposed. It was welcomed. And if what we call transformation is not an act of will, but only the moment we stop resisting the flow that has always tried to tempt us drive, what if what we call destiny is just the whisper of the kami that accompany us since birth?